Greetings. This video will be a basic tutorial on how to check the GDP growth rates of multiple countries at once and how to check them from a source that has a high degree of credibility and is updated very frequently. So we go to the Economist Magazine, which is economist.com, of course. We click on this search field and we search for markets and data. Markets and data. From there, you get to this link over here, Markets and Data, The Economist. And then from here, you can click on Indicators on the Move. Now, the website for The Economist magazine will only allow you to do this a couple times a week or whatever. If you sign up for a free subscription, you get more articles per week or per month or whatever, but you can figure out how often you want to do this. But we click on this Indicators on the Move field. Now, here in the list of countries and their GDP forecasts, we scroll down and we see estimates for 2022 and 2023, and that is real GDP, net of inflation. Now, as I explained in other videos, I'm more of a fan of nominal GDP rather than real GDP because real GDP is sort of overdoing it in terms of stripping out inflation from a GDP estimate because it does not tell you enough about investment returns as well as the connection between inflation being a fuel of technological progress. Technology consumes that inflation to produce more technology. So real GDP is a little bit misleading, but that is what is used across all economics reporting data. So that's what we have here. And you see the United States, 3.4% and 2.1%, China, Japan, Britain, and the euro area, which is the sum of all countries that use the euro as a currency unit. As we can see across all of these countries, 2022 is still higher than 2023, so that's still a little bit of the COVID-19 springback. The economic contractions of 2020 not only made 2021 shoot up, but some of that momentum is carrying into 2022, with cruising speed only expected to return in 2023. But we're seeing another phenomenon over here, which is that advanced economies are now growing pretty fast relative to what used to be called emerging economies or fast-growing emerging market countries, which are no longer really being described as such. If you've noticed, China has pulled away from all other so-called emerging market countries, and that term is not even really used anymore. Nor do we describe the BRIC countries anymore because that whole grouping was very bogus, as I describe in this video up here. So China is still going to grow at 5% apparently in 2023. And as we scroll down, Ireland, which is a country that will be the topic of one of my upcoming videos, is growing at rates associated with fast-growing emerging market countries. Even though Ireland's per capita GDP is very high, it is a very prosperous country. It is the one country in the Western world that is truly growing quickly despite being at a very high level already. So that's an interesting topic, and I'll have a video about that very soon. But then as you scroll down, you see countries like, for example, India. It's only going to revert down to 5.2%. That is not very good at all. That is something that shows that India really wasn't a fast-growing economy, and to the extent it ever had a few good years, those were more aberrations rather than part of any structural uptrend, as I describe in this video up here. But there are countries that are doing even worse than India. For example, Pakistan is poorer than India, so starting from a lower base, yet has very mediocre growth rates in the 3 handle despite their rapid population growth. So their per capita GDP growth rate in real terms is pretty low, almost no economic growth at all, despite being the poorest country in this entire list. Poorer than India, yet growing slower than India, even though India's numbers are not impressive either. So this is truly a failed state. The other Asian countries that are growing quickly are Vietnam, which is growing at a rapid rate and leaving India behind. India and Vietnam used to be growing at the same rate for a long time, and now Vietnam is pulling away because it is a better managed country than India. And Malaysia continues to do pretty well at 4%, even though it has a pretty high per capita GDP. So as we look through these estimates for 2022 and 2023, a new sorting of the world order reveals itself. China has pulled ahead of all these so-called emerging markets of the past, as I mentioned, and China has a higher per capita GDP than Russia, higher than Mexico, higher than Brazil. All those countries that used to be much more prosperous than China are now less prosperous than China. And as China joins the ranks of higher income countries, it's not there yet, but at its rapid growth rate, it's going to get there pretty soon. All those countries poorer than China will revert down to a mediocre status quo of pretty much just growing at a rate similar to the whole world's growth rate. China is automating its manufacturing to such an extent that it is ensuring that none of the countries poorer than China can be competitive in manufacturing. And that is is also something that is going to be a substantial feature of the global economy in the near future, in that a lot of poor countries are losing one of the pathways to prosperity that used to exist. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not growing in absolute terms. They are growing in absolute terms, and the entire world's rate of economic growth is accelerating, as I describe in this video up here. And in addition, remember what I say, that GDP is not even the correct metric of true economic progress. Asset prices are a better metric because they more easily assimilate the quantitative easing of central banks, and they also display economic disparity more equally because asset ownership is more concentrated than income is. But since GDP is still the primary metric for all economic growth measurement, that is what we're going to use. And this resorting is manifesting itself accordingly. What happens to countries poorer than China that cannot grow at a rate much faster than the world growth rate? They cannot adopt automation better than advanced countries. One reason advanced countries are continuing to grow is that they can more easily adopt all new technologies, especially automation, more easily than poorer countries. You know, I have this nephew who's about 8 years old, and he asked me that if the plans to make an Apple iPhone were sent back to the 19th century, would they know what to do with it? That's a pretty good question for an 8-year-old to ask. And I said that no, they would not know what to do with it because there is no infrastructure via which to conduct any design, let alone mass manufacturing of such a product. There is not a culture of electronics usage. There isn't reliable enough electricity. There isn't a telecommunication network framework to build off of. None of those things exist. And forget about sending plans back to the 19th century. You could send the plans of any high-tech consumer product to a poor country, like some country in sub-Saharan Africa or Pakistan or even India. They have access to these plans, yet they're not able to create competing products because they don't have the expertise, the infrastructures, all the enabling networks, and so forth. Why can't any of those countries become competitive in the production of electronics? Why were only South Korea, Taiwan, and China able to rise into a level of competing with the United States and Japan on this front? Because it requires a lot of different complex expertises and other aspects of infrastructure, education, and know-how that are hard to assemble in one place. You could send all the plans of all the best electronics products to sub-Saharan Africa or Pakistan or Afghanistan, and they will not be able to produce anything of value out of it. You could even pay to educate the people over there in these fields of study. It just wouldn't happen. One of the only paths for these poor countries was basic manufacturing, which now China has completely absorbed and shut other countries out of because the automation China is implementing is in fact more cost effective than the lowest cost labor in the world. And with that, we're going to see how economic growth tracks in subsequent years. But this was my update for early 2022 on world GDP. I urge everyone to look at these charts from The Economist and look at them frequently because these forecasts do get revised pretty often and get updated with recent events. For example, Russia's GDP growth forecast has been lowered substantially simply because of the problems that they are causing for themselves. Minus 10% in 2022. Anyway, a lot of different topics discussed in just a few short minutes, but they were all related, and I hope you saw how they were, and I hope I explained that well enough. If you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.